In this video, we'll be talking about thermal zones in the Revit model using the Mechanical Productivity Pack. So this is a very early step in a project, and it helps so many other processes downstream. Setting up the thermal zones in Revit helps you do your load takeoffs and load calculations and even energy modeling. It allows you to get the calculated values into the spaces, which allows you to compare actual to calculated airflows at diffusers, which then trickles down into equipment sizes, connected capacities. So this is essentially step one. We've set up some workflows to help you guys get load calculations done faster. And whether you're using third-party load calculation software or if you're doing it in Revit, this process right now doesn't really change. It starts with setting up the thermal zones in Revit. So under the analysis view classification, we have a thermal zone diagram set up for every level of the starter project. I have level 1 opened up here. So during project setup, you'll create all your spaces. A couple notes with that is that, for one, for load calculations, we want the spaces to be full height. So for GBXML information, wherever the space stops in height, that's the height of the wall. So if the architect has the ceiling as room bounding, your outside wall is only going to be 8 feet tall, which isn't accurate for the loads, and I don't recommend doing that. The best solution I've found is to simply ask the architects to change the ceilings to be not bounding. They can specify their room height, and they can put it exactly where they want it, but then that allows our space to go all the way up to the bottom of deck, capturing all the volume in the building as well as the associated proper height for the exterior wall. So we've done that in this sample project. These spaces now are going to be set to upper limit level 20 feet, and they'll be stopping once they hit that slab right at level 2. So these are full height spaces. So let's place some tags in this view to start. So we'll go down to space tags. I'm not sure if we've talked about this elsewhere, but our space tags have two options. So you can show room name and number, which if you go through the project setup video, that's what we're using. So throughout the entire model and construction documents, we're using the space tags that call out room name and number. The benefit of that is now you don't have to run the space naming utility in your model as frequently. For loads, however, we are going to use the space name and number because there's going to be certain situations where we're going to want to have multiple spaces in one architectural room. So for this workflow, we're going to use space name, number, and area for the time being. So here's all of our space tags. I've already ran the space naming utility on this, so we're seeing these names and numbers from the architect's model. So before we get to creating our zones, there's a couple things I want to do. We have a larger room here that I'm actually going to use a couple different thermal zones. So we have a southern exposure on this side of the building with a bunch of glass, and we have an east exposure on this side of the building. So I'm going to create this space into a couple different spaces so that we can have different thermal zones. If you go to Analyze, you can choose Space Separator. And what I like to do is I like to keep my perimeter zones approximately 10 feet from the outside wall, and that is what ASHRAE would recommend as well. So I'm just going to draw some lines here to start. All right, now I'm going to select that space separator line, and we're going to get a good dimension on it. So we can stretch this to our wall down here. So we're pretty close to 10 feet, but why don't we just round it off, 10 feet. And then I'm going to select this side. One tab. So I'm tabbing over this line to get to the space separator line. And let's move this temporary dimension over to here. Let's change that to 10 feet. And then we're just going to need one more line right through here. There we go. So we've used space separators in our model. The architect basically knows no difference. They have one room in this area. However, we're going to want some different exposures for the spaces. So what I'll typically do is let's copy a space and a space tag nearby. So I'm just going to copy this space and we're going to put one here. And then we're going to copy that again and put one over here. So what I'd like to do in my loads is indicate what this space represents. So I typically will take the architectural room name and just add my exposure to it. The number should be the same number. Revit automatically increased the number to the next available number. So we're getting the warning, elements have duplicate number values, and that's just fine. With doing GBXML information, as long as you have a name different, you can have the same number. And then this one here, we're going to say Hall of Justice East. By the way, these are all superhero hideouts, if you guys didn't pick that up. And we'll change this to room 100 as well. All right, there we go. So in a shared MEP model, a couple considerations here are just to make note of. So we've renamed this space, and so if we went to an electrical plan, as long as the views on the construction documents are using the tags that show room, name and number, we won't have an issue with having some derivatives of spaces. So for example, in the lighting plans, if they use the space tag that has room, name, and number, they will always match the architect and we'll never have an issue. So that's what we've set up for the shared model aspect of this. All right, so we have now all of our spaces created. I'm just going to check my upper limits on these. So these upper limits should be level 2, 0 feet. And now let's start creating zones. So you can come up here to under Analyze, Zone. Well, I guess so. I had some spaces selected. So I'm going to edit that zone, and when you're editing a zone, you can add spaces to it or you can remove spaces to it. So by default, Add is checked. So we could create this as a thermal zone. So that now is a thermal zone, which you'll see is color-coded. To change that, you can just select the thermal zone, hit Edit, and we're going to remove spaces. So we're going to start with this zone down here. Actually, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to start over here for my okay, so I'm going to start numbering up here. So let's go to Add Space. We'll select the space. And now the thermal zone is there. Let's give this one a number. So I'm going to call this VAV 1-01. I guess let's just do 1-1. And then we hit Finish. So now Revit will automatically number your thermal zones based upon how you start that first one. I guess I could have looked at my thermostats here that I've already placed, and I probably should have matched that. So since I have the thermostats there and I don't want to confuse anyone, let's follow that. So we're going to add this space, and then we will remove this space from the thermal zone. Okay, so here's our thermal zone VAV 1-1. We already see it in the color legend up here, and now let's just keep working through. So you can choose to select a space first and then go to Analyze and go zone, and that'll create that space into a zone. You can see that Revit automatically numbered it 1-2. You can also click the zone button first, and then it creates a default one with no spaces attached, and then you can add a zone and hit done. Okay, so now let's do 1-4, and let's do 1-5, and 1-6. Let's see where that is. That's this interior space, the Avenger Mansion. And I'm going to include this interior room on there as well. Actually, all these interior spaces I'm going to include on that zone. All right. And now we've got 1-7, which is down here. It's a conference room, obviously, but in this case, it's the Xavier Institute. And we got to find 1-8. So that's this interior lobby area where the receptionist would be sitting. And 1-9 is this Hall of Justice South exposure with the entrance. And 1-10 over here. So I'm going to add this bathroom to that exterior zone. And then this bathroom I'm going to add to this interior zone right here. So we're going to edit zone. There we go. All right, so we've got a couple other spaces that we don't have anything defined yet. So we're going to put a unit heater in this Spawns alley, which ends up being a mechanical and electrical room. So select the space. Let's give it a name. Unit heater -1. And we'll probably put this not used space in there as well. This Titan's Tower ends up being a small data room. So we're going to make this AC1. Okay, that basically covers the first level of the building. As you can see now, our legend has grown with all the thermal zones we've created. We have some other spaces over here. And I think in the sample project, this was another rooftop unit zone, and this was something else as well. So we'll maybe just make this one unit heater 2, which is where our water service comes in. And then this one was RTU 3. Okay, so we've got thermal zones now. Before I end up exporting the information, what I like to do is review it. So we'll tag all of our thermal zones. So we can go to annotate, tag all. We'll go down to zone tags. They're not called HVAC zone tags here, but everywhere else they are. So we can choose to do name or the calculated loads. Let's do name and calculated loads, and we can hit apply. So at the moment here, we won't see any calculated values until we run our loads, in which case we'll also see the calculated loads at spaces and everything like that. So that kind of is step one in this process. We have our thermal zone diagram set up. We can run our calculations in Revit now. We have full height spaces, so full height volumes, or we can export to third party and run our calculations there. So this process will continue to evolve as load calculation and energy modeling software is changing by the day. The last thing I guess I'll add in this video is that we do have some sheets set up for thermal zone diagrams, and I've actually made this as a part of my construction document set now. I find it valuable for the owner as well as for the people involved in the team to be aware of this information so that everyone's on the same page. So I've been including these thermal zone diagrams in my construction document sets, and you wouldn't have to use these tags with the calculated loads. You could merely just say instead of calculated loads, just show name, and then the owner can see how many thermal zones he's paying for, what he's going to get, and this is also a place where I like to put thermostat locations too. So you guys can use it as you wish, but it's set up in the beginning for you if you so want to use it.